Carrie. I'm one of the solicitors in the employment team at Mills Reeve, and today I'm joined by Emily Gillmore, Consulting Director within the People Experience team at Gallagher. And today we're going to be talking about strategic challenges that are being faced by business currently, especially as we start to emerge out of the pandemic. So thank you for joining me, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
So probably the best place to start really is that many of the equality challenges that businesses face have become amplified by the pandemic. What are your observations of how businesses are facing these challenges from the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it, talking about the pandemic now, because already our minds are kind of shifted to that's something that happened, and with the whole government stance on learning to live with COVID, I think it gives us the ability to look at it kind of objectively. And I suppose for me, one of the key observations that came out of the last couple of years is the rise and the focus that's been attributed to emotional intelligence, particularly at leadership level, and the interesting dynamic that that is creating within boardrooms and C-suites. And I suppose the space that that's giving to the diversity, equity and inclusion discussion. We're learning to talk more at a human, person-to-person level, rather than by edicts and mandates. So I think that's been a big observation within our clients from the last few years.
I think that's right, because we've had to adapt very quickly. We've had to have conversations with people that we perhaps wouldn't have as we kind of navigated how to work together during the pandemic. It was referred to as, and it still is referred to as, a gendered pandemic because it's said to have a disproportionate effect on women. Would you agree with that statement?
Look, I think the pandemic is the pandemic. It was brutal, life-altering for everyone. So I don't want to start off and sit here by leaping in with how it was harder for women because it was harrowing for everybody. But specifically through a female lens and standpoint, I think there were three key areas where the pandemic altered lives and position. The first of which, of course, was the caregiving crisis. I mean, very well reported on the hundreds of thousands of women that had to exit work because they literally had no choice. They had children at home or relatives that needed looking after. They had no choice but to give up work in order to provide care. The second impact, I think, was around the rise of domestic violence and abuse in the home. And some of that was new and some of that was already ongoing pre-pandemic. But the women experiencing that overnight lost their support network, a safe place to go. And then the third point was around, and I don't know if you remember, but there was suggestion that there might be a baby boom as a result of the pandemic. And I think just for any woman that experienced either trying to get pregnant, pregnancy, like medical appointments and stuff like that, giving birth, postpartum recovery, and anything that went along that journey, they were doing it pretty much in isolation without the usual support network. So I think the impact of that is substantial. And I don't know that we've necessarily seen all of that impact come out yet. All that being said, I do think that the pandemic caused huge strides forward in working practices. And those practices really do benefit any caregiver, not just women. That pace of change would just never have been seen without the pandemic. And lockdown sort of leveled the playing field, if you like. It proved that working from home was okay. It's okay if the kids run behind you, the Amazon man knocks on the door, you've got to nip out to drop groceries off or whatever. It just made it normal. I think we were on screen with each other like every day, weren't we? So life was at work and work was at life. And I just really think it helped to start to break down some of those barriers. So you could argue that the big upside of the pandemic was that around working practices and giving so many women and men who are providing care the opportunity to thrive both at home and at work.
I'd agree with that. So I think when the pandemic first started, it obviously did affect, certainly in my view, those women more, because it's in those highly concentrated areas where they would predominantly have jobs, whereas in the last recession we had, obviously more than 10 years ago, that mainly affected men, whereas this one affected women. But like you say, the advances in technology and the ability for us all to adapt in a way we never would have done before if it hadn't been the pandemic, meant that yes, they may have been the ones that were more affected, but there was certainly a lot that we could do to help, and it brought a lot of that to the forefront of the discussions within the company, whether that's at board level, whether that's at a more junior level, but certainly it was there for everyone to see a lot of the time, and it meant that the businesses couldn't necessarily shy away from the discussion as much. Given that the pandemic has undone some of the progress that was made in increasing diversity, what should employers be doing now to really put that back at the forefront of their strategies?
So I think that's a crucial one. And I think, firstly, I think that doing nothing isn't an option. I think the drumbeat, the noise, the internal pressure and volume that's building across D&I broadly, but particularly with the female voice, it's just getting louder. And I don't think you can claim a policy will solve your organisation's equality challenges. In fact, it's like a massive no-go. I think claiming that policy was going to solve the problem would be probably do more harm than good. And one of the big takeaways from me from International Women's Day, I don't know about you, but it was that employers were being praised and called out for walking the walk. It's not okay just to talk the talk. So I think that they're, firstly, it's get your head out of the sand, if you like. That's not an option anymore. I do think, though, employers are kind of adapting at pace to the new employee-employer contract that exists. And by that, I mean the new non-negotiables that employees demand. So this isn't salary and benefits. This is what they want out of work. And D&I is firmly in that space, as is the concept of meaningful work. And the pandemic has undone the expectation that life should fit around work. Instead, work and life must be in balance. And I think one of the things I'm really interested in is that work must and should nourish the whole person. And that whole person, when we look at women, means that employers need to be supporting the many unspoken conditions and experiences that women go through. So employers who haven't already done so need to be going back to their core values and cultural tone, because that's where it all starts, right? This isn't about tweaking policies. It's about taking an objective view of what an organisation you stand for and evolving that to fit with the new world. And those that are on the fence are in a pretty precarious position, assuming or hoping that life will return to its pre-pandemic norms. I just don't think that's the case. And if you think about it, it's actually a huge opportunity for organisations to re-engage with their workforce. Our latest survey that we did, so it addressed 1,300, nearly said 13,000 then, organisations, our State of the Sector report showed that the vast majority of those organisations are planning for change during this year, which when you consider we've just come out of a huge amount of change, it's kind of surprising. But over half of them put working practices at the top of that list. The second highest number is around cultural change. So it really is out there. And I'm for one, I'm excited to see what the conversations we're going to be having in 12 months' time, because I never thought we'd have got to where we got to in the last 2 years.
I know, it's pretty amazing. I think you're right to say about just implementing policies just isn't enough. From a legal standpoint, we've seen cases where having the policy itself, that's pick one, but then managers aren't trained on it, people aren't using it in practice, it just becomes something in an intranet, in a handbook, and the core values that are meant to be undermining it just aren't implemented in practice. It's interesting what you said about International Women's Day, because I remember laughing on the day because there was lots of companies that were not and were just tweeting out sort of offers or things to celebrate International Women's Day, and there was someone that was then retweeting their tweet about what their gender pay gap was, just to call them out on not actually implementing things that would create a more diverse workforce. So and I just think that employers are far more accountable now. I think people know their own worth a lot more after going through the pandemic. So like you say, it is good that employers are more likely to be stepping up to the challenge now. because it's expected of them. And
Absolutely.
there are going to be far more searching questions as people go through to look for new employment or choose to stay with their existing employer. They want to know what they're in for and what being involved with that business represents as a whole.